The hum of the projector fan was the loudest thing in the room. Room 304 of the Biological Sciences building always smelled like stale coffee and floor wax, but today it smelled like sweat. I stood at the podium, the cheap fabric of my H&M suit itching against my neck. My hand hovered over the next slide button on the clicker. "Slide 14, I said. My voice was steady, surprisingly steady. Here we observed the uncharacteristic folding of the beta amyloid proteins when introduced to the catalyst. I clicked. The graph appeared on the screen behind me. It was beautiful. It was 4 years of my life. It was 60-hour weeks. It was missed birthdays, a ruined relationship, and sleeping on a cot in the lab. It was my masterpiece, and it was the moment the trap sprung. Stop. The word wasn't shouted. It was spoken with the casual authority of a god bored with his subjects. I froze. I didn't turn around yet. I knew that voice. I had listened to that voice lecture for 3 years. I had listened to it berate me for wasting pipettes. I had listened to it promise me a future in academia if I just kept my head down and worked. I turned slowly. Dr. Sterling was standing up. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the other 4 members of my dissertation committee. Dr. Sterling was the department head. He was a star professor. He brought in millions in grant money. When he stood up, the air in the room changed. The oxygen seemed to leave, sucked into his lungs. Dr. Sterling. It was Dr. Vance, the committee chair. He looked nervous. Everyone always looked nervous around Sterling. "Is there a problem with the candidate's data?" Sterling sighed. He took off his rimless glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. It was a performance. A perfect theatrical performance of a disappointed father. "I wish it was just the data, Vance," Sterling said softly. The room was deadly silent. You could hear the dust settling. "I really wish it was just the data, but I cannot in good conscience allow this charade to continue for another minute." My heart hammered against my ribs. Thump, thump, thump. This was it. He was actually doing it. Sterling reached into his leather briefcase. He pulled out a stapled stack of papers. He didn't throw them. He placed them gently on the table in front of the committee. "I received an advance copy of the upcoming Nature Biotechnology journal this morning," Sterling said. His eyes finally flicked to me. They were cold, dead, like a shark looking at a seal. "It seems a paper was accepted last week, a paper detailing the exact novel protein folding method Mr. Kenji represents here as his own original work." Dr. Vance picked up the journal draft. His hands were shaking slightly. He flipped through the pages. "The authors?" Vance asked. "Myself, as senior advisor," Sterling said. "And the lead author, Brian Sterling." I looked to the back of the room. Brian was there, Sterling's nephew, the golden boy. He was sitting in the back row, wearing a suit that cost more than my tuition. He was leaning back, arms crossed, and he was smirking, a tiny, imperceptible smirk just for me. Brian had joined the lab 6 months ago. He couldn't even run a basic PCR test without contaminating the samples. He was lazy, entitled, and spent more time on his phone than at the bench. And now his name was on my life's work. "Mr. Kenji," Dr. Vance said. His voice was hard now. The pity was gone. "Do you have an explanation for why you are presenting Brian Sterling's research as your own?" "It's plagiarism," Sterling cut in. "Flagrant academic dishonesty. I am shocked. I am appalled. I brought Kenji into my lab. I trusted him. And this is how he repays the department? By attempting to steal the intellectual property of a brighter, more talented student? The gaslighting was masterful. Brighter, more talented." I looked at the faces of the committee. Dr. Liu looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Dr. Miller was frowning, scribbling furiously in her notebook. Dr. Vance looked angry. "This is grounds for immediate expulsion," Vance said. "Forget the degree, Kenji. If this is true, you'll be lucky if you aren't sued by the university for grant fraud." "I suggest," Sterling said, smoothing his tie, "that we terminate this defense immediately. We strip Mr. Kenji of his candidate status, and we escort him from the building. Sterling looked at me again. He wanted to see me break. He wanted to see the tears. He wanted me to beg. He expected the quiet, obedient student he had exploited for 4 years to crumble into a heap on the dirty carpet. He expected me to scream, to shout about fairness, to look like a hysterical lunatic while he remained the calm, tenured professional. He wanted a show. I looked at the screen behind me, my graph, my data. I looked at Brian in the back, checking his watch, bored. I looked at Sterling, and I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was cold, like liquid nitrogen. They thought they had won. They thought the game was over because they held all the cards. They had the tenure. They had the reputation. They had the journal acceptance. But they forgot one thing. I knew who I was dealing with. I had known for months. Sterling thought I was a tool, a biological machine that generated data for his glory. He didn't know I was paranoid. He didn't know about the backups. He didn't know about the hidden metadata. And he certainly didn't know what I had done to the raw files on the lab server 3 weeks ago. Sterling smiled at me, waiting for my collapse. I smiled back. I reached for the keyboard on the podium. "Actually, Dr. Vance," I said, my voice cutting through the tension, "before you call security, I think you should look at slide 15. Sterling's smile faltered, just a fraction of a millimeter. "There is no slide 15, Sterling said. "Your presentation ends at 14. "The presentation you saw ends at 14, I corrected. I hit the space bar. "But let me back up. To understand why I wasn't hyperventilating, and to understand exactly how Dr. Sterling was about to lose everything he had ever built, we need to go back to the day Brian walked into the lab. To really understand the level of hatred I felt standing at that podium, you have to understand the cost of admission. You have to understand what a PhD in molecular biology actually costs. It's not just tuition. It's not just the student loans that sit on your credit report like a tumor. The real cost is your humanity. I started my program 4 years ago. I was 24, naive and hungry. I wanted to cure diseases. I wanted to leave a mark on the scientific world. I walked into the biological sciences building with a shiny new notebook and a head full of dreams. Dr. Sterling was the gatekeeper. In the academic world, your advisor is your god. They control your funding. They control your publication schedule. They control when you graduate, and honestly, if you graduate at all. Sterling was a legend. He had 3 patents to his name. He was on the review board for Nature. He was charming, silver-haired, and spoke with a soothing baritone that made you feel special. "Kenji," he told me during my first interview, leaning back in his Herman Miller chair, "I don't just run a lab, I build legacies. If you join my team, you aren't just a student, you're family. I bought it. Hook, line, and sinker." For the first 3 years, I was the model son. I lived in the lab, literally. I had a sleeping bag rolled up under the fume hood. I knew the janitors by name. I knew exactly which vending machine in the hallway dispensed the Monster energy drinks that weren't expired. My schedule was brutal. Wake up at 5 a.m., check the cell cultures, run the centrifuge, analyze data until noon, teach undergraduate classes until 3 p.m., back to the bench, run Western blots until midnight, sleep, repeat. I missed my sister's wedding because I had to monitor a time-sensitive reaction. I missed my grandmother's funeral because Sterling needed a grant proposal rewritten over a weekend. My girlfriend of 2 years left me because she said she was tired of dating a ghost. "It will be worth it," Sterling told me, patting my shoulder after the breakup. "Greatness requires sacrifice, Kenji. You are forging steel. The fire burns, but you will come out stronger." He was always there with a platitude. He was always there to push me just a little bit harder. Then came the breakthrough. It was a Tuesday in November. It was raining. I was running a simulation on protein folding pathways, specifically looking for a way to stabilize the beta sheets in Alzheimer's plaques. It was a long shot. Most people said it was impossible. But at 3:14 a.m., the computer pinged. I stared at the screen. The model had resolved. The protein wasn't just stable. It was folding in a way that rendered it inert. It was a completely novel mechanism. It was the Holy Grail. I didn't scream. I just sat there, shaking. I felt lightheaded. This was it. This was my ticket. This was the paper that would land me a tenure-track position at MIT or Stanford. I printed the results. I ran down the hall to Sterling's office, forgetting that it was the middle of the night. But he was there. He was always there. I showed him the data. Sterling looked at the graphs. He took off his glasses. He looked at me. For a second, I saw something in his eyes that I couldn't place. It looked like hunger. It looked like greed. But then he smiled, and the mask slid back into place. "Kenji," he whispered, "you've done it. You've actually done it." He stood up and shook my hand. His grip was firm. "This is big," he said. "This is cover of nature big. But we have to be careful. We can't let anyone know. Not yet. The vultures are everywhere. If this leaks, another lab will scoop us." "I understand," I said. I felt so proud. "Lock everything down," he commanded. "All raw data goes to the secure server. No local copies on your laptop. Encrypted drives only. And Kenji, don't tell the other grad students. Jealousy is an ugly thing." I followed his orders. I moved everything to the server. I scrubbed my local drives. I felt like a secret agent protecting state secrets. I trusted him completely. 2 weeks later, Brian arrived. It was the start of the spring semester. Sterling called a lab meeting. We were all gathered around the center bench. Me, Sarah, a second-year PhD, and David, a postdoc. "Everyone," Sterling announced, beaming. "I'd like you to meet the newest member of our team. This is Brian Sterling." Brian walked in. He was tall, blonde, and had that specific kind of confident slouch that only comes from never having to worry about rent. He was wearing a vintage band t-shirt that looked brand new and expensive sneakers. "Hey," Brian said. He didn't look at us. He was looking at his phone. "Brian is joining us as a research assistant," Sterling continued. "He's taking a gap year before med school and wants to get some hands-on experience. Kenji, since you are my senior candidate, I'm putting him under your wing." My stomach dropped. "Dr. Sterling, I'm in the middle of the validation phase for the protein project. I don't really have time to train." "Nonsense," Sterling cut me off. His voice was still soft, but the steel was there. "Teaching is part of the PhD process. Kenji, Brian is bright. He'll be an asset. Get him up to speed on your project." "My project?" I asked. "The sensitive one." "Everything," Sterling said. "He needs to see how real science is done. It was a nightmare from day one. Brian wasn't just inexperienced, he was dangerous. He treated the lab like a playground. I didn't see that last 5 times I was done. I remembered so far." The machine started shaking violently, walking across the table like a washing machine with a brick inside. If I hadn't dove across the room and hit the emergency kill switch, he would have destroyed a $50,000 piece of equipment. Brian just laughed. "Whoops, my bad, dude. He didn't take notes. He contaminated reagents by double-dipping pipettes. He left the negative 80-degree freezer open while he checked Instagram, rooming 3 months of cell lines." Every time I complained to Sterling, I got the same speech. "Be patient, Kenji. He's learning. You were new once, too." "I never almost blew up the centrifuge, Dr. Sterling," I argued, "and he's not even trying. He leaves at 2 p.m. every day." Sterling's expression hardened. "Brian is going through a lot. Family issues. I need you to support him. I need you to share your data with him so he can practice analysis. Give him access to the server. The secure server." "Yes, Kenji." "The secure server." I hesitated. "But you said, do I need to remind you who signed your stipend checks, Kenji?" Sterling asked. The warmth was gone. The father was gone. "Give him the access codes." So I did. I gave Brian the passwords. I showed him the file structures. I walked him through my statistical models. I explained, step by step, how the protein folding discovery worked. Brian nodded, chewing gum, looking half asleep. "Cool. So, like this graph makes the line go up?" "Yes, Brian," I sighed. "The line goes up. It means the protein is stable." "Nice," he said. "Hey, can I bounce? I have tickets to the game tonight." I watched him leave. I looked at the mess he left on his bench. Uncapped tubes. Spilled buffer solution. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning up after him. The shift happened gradually over the next 3 months. I started noticing things, small things. My lab notebook would be in a slightly different position than I left it. Files on the server showed last access timestamps at times when I wasn't in the lab. Sterling stopped asking me for weekly updates. He stopped coming to my bench to chat. One afternoon, I walked past Sterling's office. The door was slightly ajar. I heard voices. "It's impressive, Brian," Sterling was saying. "Really impressive work." "Yeah, well, I put a lot of hours in," Brian's voice replied. I paused. Brian? Putting hours in? The kid hadn't been in the lab past 3 p.m. since he started. "We need to start drafting the manuscript," Sterling said. "The submission deadline for Nature is coming up. We need to be aggressive." I frowned. "We need to start drafting?" I was already drafting. I had sent Sterling my first draft 2 weeks ago. He hadn't given me any feedback yet. I knocked on the door. The voices stopped instantly. "Come in," Sterling called out. His voice was tight. I pushed the door open. Sterling was sitting at his desk. Brian was in the chair opposite him, feet up on the desk. Brian quickly pulled his feet down. Sterling shuffled some papers into a drawer. "Kenji," Sterling said. He looked annoyed. "I'm in a meeting." I heard you talking about the manuscript," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I was wondering if you had notes on my draft yet." Sterling sighed. He looked at Brian, then back at me. "Your draft needs a lot of work, Kenji," he said. "The writing is clunky, passive, it's not ready, but the data is solid," I said. "And the deadline. Don't worry about the deadline," Sterling said dismissively. "We have time. Focus on your defense presentation. That's what matters right now. Let me worry about the publication. But close the door on your way out, Kenji." I walked back to my bench. My hands were cold. Something was wrong. The air felt thin. I sat down at my computer. I logged into the server. I checked the file logs again. User B_Sterling had accessed the master data final folder at 8 a.m. this morning, and yesterday, and the day before. Why was the undergrad accessing my raw data every morning? And why did Sterling hide the papers when I walked in? Paranoia is a funny thing. In science, we are trained to doubt. We are trained to question everything until we have proof. I started to question my reality. Was I just being jealous? Was I just stressed about the defense? Or was I being played? I looked around the empty lab. The hum of the freezer seemed louder than usual. It sounded like a warning. I decided to run a test, a control experiment. If Brian was actually analyzing my data, he wouldn't notice a slight alteration. But if he was just copying it, well, that would be different. I opened the master spreadsheet. I found a cluster of data points in the control group. Irrelevant numbers, mostly background noise. I changed a single digit. A 0.04 became a 0.09. It was a tiny change. It wouldn't affect the overall graph shape to the naked eye, but mathematically, it created a specific, identifiable error in the standard deviation calculation. It was a digital fingerprint. A trap. I saved the file. "Let's see who's actually doing the work," I whispered to the empty room. I didn't know it then, but that single keystroke was the only thing that would save my life, because the storm wasn't coming. It was already here. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Have you ever felt like you were being erased from your own life? It's not a sudden disappearance. It's a slow, methodical scrubbing. Like someone is taking a sandpaper to your face in every photograph until you're just a blur. That was my life in the lab. It started with the meetings. I'd show up for our scheduled Monday morning sync, and the conference room would be empty. I'd check my email, thinking I missed a cancellation. Nothing. Then, 30 minutes later, I'd see Dr. Sterling and Brian walking out of Sterling's private office, laughing, smelling like expensive espresso. "Oh, Kenji," Sterling would say, not even breaking his stride. We decided to start early. Brian had some fascinating insights on the modeling. We didn't want to disturb your lab work, my lab work. The work that was providing the very data they were discussing. I was being sidelined in my own project. Every time I tried to bring up the manuscript, Sterling would wave me off. He became increasingly critical of my physical lab presence. If I was 5 minutes late because of a bus delay, he'd be waiting by my bench, tapping his watch. Professionalism, Kenji. If you can't manage your time, how can you manage a research team? But Brian? Brian could show up at noon, spend 3 hours looking at TikTok, and then leave for networking lunch with Sterling. The gaslighting reached a fever pitch in mid-April. I was finishing up the final validation runs, the boring work that actually proves a discovery isn't just a fluke. I had been awake for 36 hours straight. My eyes felt like they had sand behind them. I went to the shared printer to grab my data sheets. The tray was full. I picked up the stack, expecting my graphs, but the top page wasn't mine. Or rather, it was mine, but the header was different. It was a draft of the Nature Biotechnology submission. My heart stopped. My blood went cold, then boiling hot. There, in black and white, was the title, A Novel Approach to Beta Amyloid Stabilization via Catalytic Folding. My title, word for word. I looked at the author block. Lead author, Brian J. Sterling, second author, Gregory Sterling, PhD. My name wasn't there. Not first, not second, not even in the additional contributors section. I flipped through the pages with trembling hands. It was my work, my unique phrasing, my specific formatting of the data tables. Even the fingerprint error I had planted, the 0.09 instead of 0.04, was right there on page 6. Printed in high-resolution ink. They hadn't just stolen the idea, they had copied and pasted my soul. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I took the draft and marched straight into Sterling's office. I didn't knock. Sterling was looking at a vacation brochure, skiing in Switzerland. Brian was sitting on the sofa, throwing a stress ball against the wall. Thump! Catch! Thump! Catch! I slammed the papers onto Sterling's desk. What is this? My voice cracked. Raw from lack of sleep and pure, unadulterated shock. Sterling didn't even flinch. He slowly looked down at the papers, then back up at me. He looked bored. It's a manuscript, Kenji. I assume you've seen one before. It's my manuscript, I shouted. Brian stopped throwing the ball. He was watching me now, a small, ugly grin spreading across his face. This is my data. These are my words. Why is Brian's name at the top? Why am I not even mentioned? Sterling sighed, leaning back and interlacing his fingers. Kenji, let's be realistic. You are a student, a technician. You did the bench work, yes. But Brian provided the conceptual framework. He refined the vision. He made the data palatable for a high-tier journal. He doesn't know what a pipette is. I yelled. He hasn't spent more than 10 hours a week in this lab. I've given 4 years to this. I slept under the fume hood for this. And we appreciate that, Sterling said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. But in the real world, the names on the paper are the names that matter. Brian has a bright future. This publication will ensure his entry into the best medical schools. It's a family legacy. It's fraud, I whispered. It's academic theft. I'm going to the dean. I'm going to the ethics committee. The silence that followed was heavy. Brian laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound. Sterling stood up. He was a tall man, and when he wanted to be, he was terrifying. He walked around the desk until he was inches from my face. I could smell the expensive peppermint he chewed. Listen to me very carefully, Kenji, Sterling said. The fatherly mask was gone. This was the shark. You go to the dean. I'll tell them you've been struggling. I'll show them evidence that you've been faking your results because of the pressure. I'll tell them you became obsessed and tried to sabotage Brian's brilliant work out of spite. No one will believe that, I said, though my voice was shaking. Everyone will believe it, Sterling countered. I am a department head. I've brought $40 million in grants to this university. You're a kid with an H&M suit and a visa that depends on your student status. Do you know what happens if you're expelled for academic dishonesty? He let that hang in the air. I knew. I'd be deported within 30 days. My career would be over before it started. No lab in the world would touch me. I will blacklist you. Sterling continued. I will make one phone call, and you won't even be able to get a job washing beakers in a high school chemistry class. You will be a pariah, a ghost. He patted my cheek. It felt like a slap. Now, Sterling said, his voice returning to that calm baritone honey, go back to your bench, finish the validation runs, write your little dissertation, you'll get your PhD, I'll make sure you pass your defense. You get the degree, Brian gets the paper, and I get the credit. Everyone wins. I don't win, I said. You survive, Sterling said. In this economy, Kenji, that's the same thing as winning. Now get out. I walked out of the office. My legs felt like they were made of lead. Brian's laughter followed me down the hall. I went back to the lab. I sat on my stool. I looked at the microscope, at the racks of test tubes, at the thousands of dollars of equipment that I had treated with more care than my own body. It was all a lie. The legacy, the family, the sacred pursuit of truth. It was just a machine designed to grind up people like me to fuel people like them. I looked at the server icon on my desktop. Sterling thought he had me. He thought the threat of the blacklist was his ultimate weapon. And he was right. In a normal world, it would be. He had the power, the prestige, and the paper trail. But Sterling was old. He was a big picture guy. He hadn't touched a raw data file in a decade. He didn't understand how modern metadata worked. He didn't understand that every time Brian logged into that server to refine the vision, he was leaving a digital footprint that screamed thief. And most importantly, Sterling didn't know that I hadn't just salted the data with one error. I had built a logic bomb into the final analysis script. If someone tried to run the final calculations using the master file, the one Brian had stolen, without a specific hidden decryption key that I kept on a physical thumb drive in my pocket, the script would appear to run perfectly. It would generate the beautiful nature-ready graphs they wanted. But the underlying math, it would be subtly, mathematically impossible. It would produce results that violated the second law of thermodynamics. To a casual observer, it looked like a breakthrough. To a high-level peer reviewer, it looked like the most obvious, pathetic forgery in the history of science. Sterling wanted a show. He wanted a smooth, quiet transition where I handed over my life's work in exchange for a piece of paper. He thought he had me backed into a corner. But as I sat there in the dark lab, watching the green lights of the equipment flicker, I realized something. If I was going down, if I was going to be deported and blacklisted and ruined, I wasn't going alone. I was going to burn the whole temple down with me. I opened my laptop. I didn't work on my defense. I didn't work on the validation runs. I started writing a very different kind of script, one that would execute only when I hit slide 15. The breaking point was over. Now, it was time for the plan. The weeks leading up to the defense were a slow-motion car crash. I existed in a state of dual reality. In one world, I was the dutiful, broken dog, head bowed, performing the grunt work for my masters. In the other, I was a ghost in the machine, weaving a digital noose with every line of code I wrote. The final breaking point didn't happen in the lab. It happened at a celebratory dinner at Sterling's mansion in the hills. Sterling had invited the entire department, the deans, the influential donors, and the committee members to celebrate the monumental achievement of the lab. He forced me to attend. He told me it would look suspicious if his senior researcher wasn't there to celebrate the success of his colleague, Brian. I stood in the corner of a room that cost more than my parents' house back home. I held a glass of expensive champagne that tasted like battery acid. I watched as Brian stood in the center of a circle of deans, wearing a cashmere sweater and a look of practiced humility. It was a team effort, really, Brian was saying, his voice loud enough for me to hear. But when I saw the initial folding patterns, I just knew we had to pivot the entire project. It was a gut feeling, you know. Science is as much about intuition as it is about data. The dean of research clapped him on the shoulder. Incredible work, Brian, to think a first-year assistant with such a grasp on molecular dynamics. It's in the blood, I suppose. Sterling stood next to him, beaming like a proud king. He caught my eye across the room. He didn't look away. He raised his glass to me. It wasn't a toast. It was a reminder. I own you. I own your work. I own your silence. I left the party early. I walked 3 miles back to my cramped apartment because I couldn't stand to be in a car, couldn't stand to be trapped. My mind was spinning. They weren't just stealing the paper. They were building a myth. Brian was the prodigy, and I was being relegated to the role of the unimaginative technician who just happened to be in the room. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, the blue light of my monitor the only thing illuminating my room. It was time to finalize the plan. Sterling's biggest mistake was his ego. He assumed that because he had the power to destroy my career, I wouldn't dare fight back. He assumed I was playing the same game he was, a game of prestige and cetaceans. He didn't realize I had stopped caring about the PhD. The moment he threatened my visa and my life, the degree became worthless to me. If I couldn't be a scientist with integrity, I didn't want to be a scientist at all. I started with the Kona logic bomb. Modern protein modeling relies on massive data sets and specific algorithms. Brian had stolen the Masterdale file, but he didn't realize I had replaced the actual processing script on the server with a modified version. My logic bomb was elegant. It used a technique called steganography. I hid layers of data within the image files of the graphs themselves. To the human eye, the graphs looked perfect. But if you ran a simple chess-up, a mathematical verification, the numbers wouldn't add up. Ghost variables. These were mathematical constants that worked perfectly for the nature submission because I had manually tuned them to look correct. However, these constants were tied to a very specific system clock. On the day of my defense, at exactly 10 a.m., the scheduled start time, the script would decay. The ghost variables would revert to their true, chaotic state. Anyone looking at the data after that moment would see a mess of impossible physics. The protein wouldn't just fold, it would mathematically explode, but I needed more than just technical failure. I needed a confession. I knew Sterling was too smart to put his threats in an email. He was old school. He only threatened you in person, behind closed doors. So, I became a student of the very thing I was accused of, surveillance. I bought a high-end voice-activated recorder, the kind used by private investigators. It was no bigger than a coin. I didn't put it in my pocket. Sterling might see me reach for it. Instead, I taped it inside the lining of my tattered lab notebook, the one he always mocked me for carrying. The next morning, I went into his office. I acted the part of the broken student perfectly. I let my shoulders slump. I made my voice shake. "Dr. Sterling," I said, staring at the floor, "I've been thinking about what you said, about the blacklist, about my visa, and—" Sterling asked, not looking up from his computer. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll support Brian's lead authorship. I'll give him my remaining notes. But I need a guarantee. I need you to promise, in writing, that you will recommend me for the senior research position at Apex Biotech after I graduate." Sterling finally looked up. He laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "A guarantee. Penji, you're in no position to negotiate. You'll do it because if you don't, you're packing your bags for a one-way flight. I don't need to put anything in writing. My word is the only thing keeping you in this country. But I did all the work," I whispered, leaning in closer, the notebook on his desk between us. Every single line of code, every midnight run. Brian doesn't even know how to calibrate the software. If people found out, they'd hear it from a disgraced, deported fraud, Sterling snapped. "Brian is a Sterling. You are a tool. Tools don't get guarantees. They get used until they're blunt, and then they get thrown away. Now, give me the final decryption key for the server." Brian tried to run a new simulation this morning, and the script threw an error. I felt a surge of adrenaline. The logic bomb was already twitching. "The key is on a drive," I said, reaching into my pocket and handing him a encrypted USB. "It's all there. Everything you need to finish the Nature paper without me." Sterling took the drive with a look of pure contempt. "Good. Now get out of my sight. And Kenji? When you stand at that podium next week for your defense, I expect you to thank Brian in your acknowledgments. Make it heartfelt. The committee loves a collaborative spirit. I'll make it unforgettable," I said. I walked out, my heart hammering. I went straight to the library, to a corner without cameras. I opened the notebook and retrieved the recorder. I listened to the playback. "Brian is a Sterling. You are a tool. My word is the only thing keeping you in this country. Give me the final decryption key." Brian tried to run a new simulation. It was gold. It was a recorded admission of academic fraud, coercion, and the fact that Brian couldn't even run the software he was claiming to have revolutionized. But I wasn't done. I contacted a friend from my undergraduate years who is now a junior editor at a rival scientific blog, not Nature, but a site famous for exposing paper mills and academic scandals. I told him I had a story. I told him to be ready for a live update on the morning of the 24th. Then I did the hardest part. I waited. I spent the next 6 days acting like a man who had given up. I didn't go to the lab. I sat in the park. I watched the birds. I ate slowly. I felt like a condemned prisoner enjoying his last meal. But the truth was the opposite. I wasn't the one being executed. I was the executioner, and I was just waiting for the clock to strike 10. The night before the defense, I did one final check of the server. I saw that Brian had logged in. He had used my key. He had run the final simulations. He had updated the Nature manuscript with the new data generated by my decaying script. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Sterling and Brian were currently celebrating, probably drinking more of that battery acid champagne, toastings to their legacy. They thought they had reached the summit. They didn't realize they were standing on a trapdoor, and I had my finger on the lever. I looked at my suit, the cheap H&M suit I would wear the next day. I ironed the shirt. I polished my shoes. Tomorrow, I would walk into room 304. I would face the committee. I would let them accuse me. I would let Sterling smirk. And then I would hit slide 15. The morning of May 24th didn't feel like the most important day of my life. It felt like the day of a funeral, specifically Sterling's. I woke up at 4:30 a.m., long before the sun had even considered hitting the campus of the university. I didn't feel tired. The adrenaline had burned away the need for sleep days ago, replaced by a cold, vibrating clarity. I sat at my small kitchen table, drinking black coffee and staring at my laptop. This was the final check. In the world of high-stakes academic fraud, you don't get a second chance. If Sterling suspecting even a hint of what I was doing, he'd have campus security tackle me before I reached the podium. I logged into the university's internal server one last time. The logic bomb was green. The ghost variables I had planted in the dataset were currently stable, but the internal clock was ticking. In exactly 4 hours, the decay would begin. But I needed a way to ensure that the evidence wouldn't just disappear when the room got chaotic. I knew Sterling. If things went south, he'd pull the power cord, wipe the server, and claim a technical glitch destroyed the data. I needed the cloud mirror. I spent the next 2 hours writing a script that would mirror my presentation's live data feed to 3 different locations: the department's public-facing research blog, my friend's journalism site, and a decentralized blockchain storage locker. I wasn't just presenting to the committee, I was broadcasting a live autopsy of Sterling's career to the entire internet. Once the scripts were live, I wrote the Dead Man's Switch email. It was addressed to the university provost, the Office of Research Integrity, and the legal department of Nature Biotechnology. I attached the audio recording of Sterling's threats, the original time-stamped raw data files from 4 years ago, and a detailed explanation of the fingerprint errors I had planted in Brian's stolen version. I set the email to send at 11:30 a.m., exactly halfway through my scheduled defense time. If I was still standing, I could cancel it. If I was being hauled out by security, the world would know why. I closed my laptop. I showered. I shaved with a precision I usually reserved for microdissections. I put on the suit. Walking onto campus felt different this time. For 4 years, I had walked these paths as a servant. I had looked up at the brick buildings with awe and a touch of fear. Today, I looked at them as a demolition expert looks at a building rigged with C4. I knew exactly where the structural weaknesses were. I knew which pillars to hit. I reached room 304 at 9:45 a.m. Sterling was already there. He was wearing a tuxedo. A tuxedo. He looked like he was attending an awards gala, not a student's PhD defense. He was holding a flute of sparkling water, chatting with Dr. Vance and Dr. Miller. Brian was next to him, looking bored, leaning against the wall and scrolling through his phone. "Ah, Kenji," Sterling called out, his voice booming with false warmth. "The man of the hour. You look like you haven't slept, but that's the tradition, isn't it? Vance Miller, you remember my senior researcher? The one who helped Brian finalize that incredible protein model?" Dr. Vance nodded curtly. "We've seen the draft, Kenji. Extremely impressive. It's rare to see a student-assistant partnership yield such nature-worthy results. The subtext is clear. They already believed the story Sterling had sold them. Brian was the genius, and I was the lucky assistant who got to tag along for the ride. "I'm ready to begin," I said. My voice was flat. No emotion, no fear. "Good, good," Sterling said, stepping closer to me. He lowered his voice so only I could hear. "Remember what we discussed, Kenji. No heroics, no corrections. You read the slides exactly as they are prepared. You thank Brian, you get your degree. You make a scene, and I promise you, you won't even make it to the airport before the police are waiting for you." I looked him in the eye. For the first time in 4 years, I didn't look away. "I understand exactly what I have to do, Dr. Sterling." "Excellent," he said, patting my arm. "Let's get this over with. I have a lunch reservation at the club to celebrate Brian's publication." I walked to the front of the room. I opened my laptop and plugged in the HDMI cable. The projector flickered to life, throwing the Tyval slide onto the screen. Mechanisms of catalytic protein folding, a novel framework. Candidate, Kenji Sato. Principal investigator, Dr. Gregory Sterling. I saw Brian smirk from the back row. He thought he was watching a puppet show. I checked the time on the corner of the screen. 10 a.m. The logic bomb had just activated. The decay was beginning. I looked at the committee. Dr. Vance sat in the center, his notebook open, pen ready to bleed red ink over my work. Dr. Miller looked skeptical. Dr. Liu looked pitying. "Mr. Kenji," Dr. Vance said, tapping his gavel, a bit dramatic for a defense, but he loved the theater of it. "You may begin. Please focus on the methodology of the second phase stabilization. That is where Dr. Sterling says the most innovative work occurred." "Thank you, Dr. Vance," I said. I started the presentation. For the first 15 minutes, I played the part perfectly. I talked about the early failures. I talked about the chemistry. I used the language of a man who was resigned to his fate. I saw Sterling relax. He leaned back in his chair, a smug expression on his face. He even started nodding, as if he were the one who had taught me everything I was saying. Brian was barely paying attention. He was texting under the table. Then I reached the results section. The part where the data I was showing was being pulled live from the server Brian had finalized with my stolen key. "Now," I said, my heart beginning to race, "we move to the validation models. This is where the protein stability is mathematically conferred." I clicked the button. The screen showed a beautiful, complex 3D rendering of a protein strand. It looked perfect. But as the committee watched, the numbers on the sidebar began to jitter. "Wait," Dr. Miller said, leaning forward, squinting through her glasses. "Mr. Kenji, look at the enthalpy values on that simulation. They're fluctuating." "It's likely just a rendering glitch, Dr. Miller," I said calmly. "The underlying data, provided by Brian Sterling's final analysis, is supposedly flawless." I saw Sterling's head snap up. He frowned at the screen. "Click to the next slide." Sterling commanded from the audience, "It's just a cache issue." I clicked. Slide 14 appeared. This was the graph from the Nature draft, the one Brian had claimed as his own. But because the logic bomb had decayed the variables, the graph was no longer a smooth curve. It was a jagged, chaotic mess of red lines that spiked off the chart. "What is that?" Dr. Vance demanded, standing up. "That's not the data we saw in the draft. These values are physically impossible. According to this graph, the protein is generating energy out of nowhere. You're violating the laws of thermodynamics, Kenji." "I agree, Dr. Vance," I said, my voice getting louder, more confident. "The data is impossible. And yet, this is the exact dataset that was submitted to Nature under Brian Sterling's name last week." The room went into a tailspin. "That's a lie," Brian shouted, finally putting his phone down. His face was beet red. "You're sabotaging the file. You're messing with the code right now." "I'm not touching anything, Brian," I said, holding my hands up away from the laptop. "The simulation is running live off the department server, the same server you told Dr. Sterling you had secured and refined." Sterling was on his feet now. He wasn't smirking anymore. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He looked like he wanted to jump over the table and strangle me. "Shut it down," Sterling roared. "Vance, he's corrupted the local link. This is a pathetic attempt at sabotage by a failing student. Security, get him out of here." Two campus security guards, who had been standing in the hallway, stepped into the room. "Wait," Dr. Miller said, her voice sharp as a blade. "I want to see the metadata. If this is a live feed, we can check the edit history of the master file." "There's no time for that," Sterling shouted. "He's a fraud. I'm the department head, and I am telling you to remove him." I looked at the clock. 10:30 a.m. "Actually," I said, looking directly at Dr. Vance, "we don't need to check the metadata on the server, because the truth isn't on the server. The truth is on slide 15. The room went silent. Sterling froze. He remembered our conversation. "There is no slide 15. There is no slide 15. Sterling hissed, his voice trembling. "There is now," I said. I hit the space bar. The screen didn't show a graph. It didn't show a protein model. Slide 15 was a simple, high-resolution video file player with a play button in the center. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't wait for the security guards to reach me. Enter. The speakers in the ceiling, usually used for quiet academic lectures, crackled to life with a sound that was jarringly intimate. "Brian is a Sterling. You are a tool. Tools don't get guarantees. They get used until they're blunt, and then they get thrown away." Sterling's voice filled the room. It was unmistakable. That rich baritone authority was now dripping with a naked, ugly malice that no one in that room had ever heard before. The security guards stopped. They looked at each other, then at Dr. Vance. Dr. Vance looked like he had been turned to stone. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes fixed on Sterling, who had gone from a vibrant, powerful academic lead to a man who looked like he was suffering a stroke. His face was a pale, sickly gray. The recording continued. "My word is the only thing keeping you in this country. Give me the final decryption key for the server. Brian tried to run a new simulation this morning, and the script threw an error. Turn it off," Brian screamed. He lunged toward the podium, his face distorted, looking less like a golden boy and more like a cornered animal. "He's faking it. It's AI. It's a deep fake." I stepped aside, letting him reach the laptop. But the moment his hand touched the keyboard, the screen changed again. I had programmed a lockout. The audio continued to loop, the most damning parts repeating over and over like a funeral dirge for their reputations. "Dr. Miller, Dr. Vance," I said, my voice projecting over the recording. "You mentioned the physical impossibility of the data on slide 14. That wasn't a glitch. It was a mathematical necessity." I pulled a physical folder from under the podium, the only paper copy I had kept. I walked it over to the committee table and laid it out. 4 years ago, I began this project," I said. "I salted my raw data. Every 1,000th entry in my spreadsheets contains a specific, non-random digit that, when viewed as a sequence, forms my university ID number. It's a digital watermark. It serves no scientific purpose, but it proves origin." I pointed to the screen, where I had forced a secondary window to open, showing Brian's Nature submission side by side with my original logs from 2021. As you can see, Brian's original discovery contains my university ID hidden in the noise. He didn't just steal the results. He was too lazy or too incompetent to even scrub the raw data before claiming it as his own. He copied the watermarks of the man he called a tool. Dr. Miller stood up and leaned over the papers. She was a world-class statistician. She saw it instantly. Her face went from shock to a cold, professional fury. "Greg," she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. She was looking at Sterling. "Explain this. Explain why your nephew's breakthrough contains Kenji's student ID in the raw noise." Sterling tried to speak. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, rattling sound came out. He looked at the committee, then at the deans in the back, then at the camera I had pointed at him, the camera that was currently streaming his downfall to a live audience of thousands. I was unaware of the specific data entry methods," Sterling stammered, his hands shaking so violently he had to grip the edge of the table. "I trusted Brian. I thought I was misled. Kenji must have planted this to frame us. He's been unstable." "Misled?" Dr. Vance asked. his voice booming. "We just heard you threaten to deport him if he didn't hand over the keys. We heard you admit that Brian couldn't even run the software. Greg, you didn't just steal a paper. You attempted to destroy a student's life to cover up your own fraud." "It was for the department," Sterling suddenly shouted, his composure snapping completely. He began pacing, gesturing wildly. "Do you have any idea how much funding depends on a star discovery? Do you know what the donors want? They want a story. They want a Sterling. They don't want a nobody. I did what was necessary to keep this lab alive. You did what was necessary to make your nephew a star," Dr. Liu said, her voice filled with disgust. "And you used university resources and a human being as a sacrifice." The room erupted. The deans were on their phones, likely calling the legal department. Brian was still trying to smash the laptop to stop the audio, but the cloud mirror I had set up meant the audio was coming from the room's integrated sound system, which I had overridden through the server. Then the final blow landed. My phone buzzed in my pocket. 11:30 a.m. The dead man's switch had fired. Across the room, Dr. Vance's tablet chimed, then Dr. Miller's, then the dean's. "What is this?" Dr. Vance asked, looking at his screen. "An email from the Office of Research Integrity with full audio transcripts and time-stamped server logs?" "It's the full story," I said. "Sent to everyone who matters, including the editors at Nature, including the federal grant board that provided your $3 million funding for this project, Dr. Sterling." Sterling collapsed back into his chair. He looked small. For the first time, he looked his age. The god of the lab was gone. He was just a tired, dishonest old man who had gambled his legacy on a lie and lost. "You're done, Greg," Dr. Vance said, his voice heavy with the weight of the coming scandal. "Security, please escort Dr. Sterling and Mr. Brian Sterling from the premises. We will be conducting a full audit, and I imagine the police will want to discuss the matter of coercion and visa fraud." The guards, who had been watching the drama like everyone else, finally moved. They didn't touch me. They went straight for Sterling. "Get your hands off me," Brian yelled, trying to push a guard away. "My father is on the board. You can't touch me. Your father is going to be very busy with lawyers." "Brian," Dr. Miller said coldly, "now leave. Before we decide to press charges for the damage you're doing to that laptop." I watched them being led out. Sterling walked with his head down, refusing to look at the colleagues who had admired him an hour ago. Brian was still shouting, still entitled, still convinced the world owed him a win. The door swung shut behind them. The silence that followed was deafening. The audio recording had finally reached the end of its loop and stopped. The only sound was the hum of the projector fan, the same sound that had started the day. I stood at the podium. I felt nothing. No joy, no triumph, just a profound, hollow sense of relief. The weight of 4 years of exploitation was gone, but the cost was etched into my bones. "Mr. Kenji," Dr. Vance said, breaking the silence. He looked at me with a mixture of respect and deep embarrassment. I think we owe you a great deal more than an apology. Under the circumstances, this defense is obviously terminated. However, I want to be clear, the committee has seen enough. We will be reviewing your actual work, the work Sterling tried to hide, within the week." "Thank you, Dr. Vance," I said. "And Kenji," Dr. Miller added, "I'll be calling the provost personally regarding your visa. No one is getting deported today. Except maybe the Sterling's reputations." I nodded. I packed up my laptop. I walked out of room 304. As I walked down the hallway, I passed the lab. The lights were on. The machines were still humming, oblivious to the fact that their master had been dethroned. I didn't go in. I kept walking, out of the building, into the bright, blinding light of the afternoon sun. I was a tool no longer. I was the architect of my own life. And for the first time in 4 years, I knew exactly where I was going. They say the wheels of justice turn slowly, but in the world of academia, when a scandal of this magnitude hits, the collapse is instantaneous. It's like a controlled demolition. Once the primary supports, reputation, and funding are blown, the rest of the structure pancaking down is just a matter of gravity. I didn't stay to watch the dust settle. After walking out of the biological sciences building that afternoon, I went back to my apartment, turned off my phone, and slept for 20 hours straight. For the first time in 4 years, I didn't dream about protein folding. I didn't dream about Dr. Sterling's voice. I just drifted in a dark, silent void. It was the most productive thing I'd done in years. The fallout began the next morning. The university didn't just fire Dr. Sterling, they attempted to erase him. By the time I turned my phone back on, his faculty page was a 404 error. His name had been stripped from the research wing he had helped fund. The Board of Trustees issued a formal statement within 48 hours, distancing themselves from his unethical and unauthorized actions. But the real damage was federal, because Sterling had used federal grant money, taxpayer dollars, to fund research that he then knowingly committed fraud with. The Department of Justice got involved. They don't care about academic prestige. They care about wire fraud and the misappropriation of funds. The investigation revealed that the Nature paper wasn't the first time Sterling had refined a student's data. They found a pattern going back a decade. He had built a literal empire on the backs of international students who were too afraid for their visas to speak up. He wasn't a scientist. He was a human trafficker of intellectual property. Sterling lost everything. His tenure was revoked, which meant his multi-million-dollar pension vanished. The university sued him to claw back the grant money he'd mismanaged. Last I heard, he had sold the mansion in the hills to pay for a legal defense team that was currently trying to keep him out of federal prison. He went from a god of biology to a man whose name is now a cautionary tale mentioned in every mandatory ethics and research seminar across the country. And Brian, the Golden Boy's fall was less dignified. The medical schools he had applied to didn't just reject him, they blacklisted him. The Sterling name, which was supposed to be his golden ticket, became a radioactive brand. He tried to claim he was a victim of his uncle's influence, but the Nature editors released a statement showing that Brian had personally signed the author contribution form, swearing he had performed the data analysis. He was caught in a lie he couldn't charm his way out of. He was expelled from the university, obviously. Last I saw of him, a former lab mate sent me a screenshot of Brian's Instagram. He was working as a brand ambassador for a crypto scam, looking bloated and desperate, still trying to sell a lifestyle he no longer had the means to support. As for me, the university tried to make it right. They offered me a prestigious postdoctoral fellowship with a massive stipend. They offered me an apology from the provost in front of the entire faculty. They even offered to let me take over Sterling's old lab space. I turned them all down. Academia had given me a PhD, but it had also shown me its teeth. I realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my life begging for grants and playing politics with people who valued stories over truth. I took my data, my real data, and I walked. The day after my story hit the scientific blogs, my inbox didn't just fill up, it exploded. I had offers from every major biotech firm in the world. They didn't care about my collaborative spirit or my legacy. They cared that I had solved the protein folding problem that had stumped the industry for 20 years, and they cared that I was smart enough to protect my work. I signed with a private biotech startup in San Francisco. They didn't just give me a job, they gave me a department. I have a 6-figure salary, a signing bonus that paid off my student loans in a single afternoon, and most importantly, I have a team of scientists who are treated like human beings. In my lab, we have a rule. The person who does the work gets the credit, period. There are no family legacies here. There is only the data. The Nature paper was eventually published, but the author list looked very different. Lead author, Kenji Sato, PhD. There was no second author, no senior advisor, just me. The journal actually ran a special editorial about the importance of protecting student researchers from exploitation. My face was on the cover of the very issue Sterling had tried to steal. I keep a framed copy of that cover in my office, not out of vanity, but as a reminder. A few months ago, I was back in the city for a conference. I found myself driving past the old university. I parked the car and walked toward the biological sciences building. It looked smaller than I remembered, less intimidating. I saw a group of first-year PhD students standing outside the entrance. They looked tired. They were holding their coffee cups like shields, talking nervously about their upcoming rotations. One of them, a young woman with a thick stack of lab notebooks, looked exactly like I did 4 years ago, hungry, hopeful, and dangerously naive. I almost walked over to her. I wanted to tell her to watch her back. I wanted to tell her to watermark her files and record her meetings. But then I saw her smile at something her friend said. She had that spark, that genuine love for the mystery of life that Sterling had almost extinguished in me. I realized she didn't need a warning. She needed a world where people like Sterling don't exist. And that's what I'm doing now. I spend a significant portion of my time mentoring international students. I set up a legal fund specifically for researchers facing visa-based coercion. I'm making sure that the tools of the world have a voice, and more importantly, a way to fight back. Sometimes late at night when the lab is quiet and the simulations are running, I think about that slide 15. I think about the look on Sterling's face when the audio started playing. People ask me if I regret destroying his life. They ask if I could have handled it more professionally within the system. I just look at my lab, at my team, and at the life I've built from the ashes of his betrayal. The system was designed to protect him. I didn't destroy his life. I simply stopped allowing him to live mine. I'm no longer the student sleeping on a cot. I'm no longer the ghost in the machine. I am the architect, and the structure I'm building now, it's built on the one thing Sterling could never understand: the truth,